What happens when two of television's most outspoken political commentators clash in a way that nobody saw coming? You won't believe what unfolds when Bill Maher sits down with Stephen Colbert for what was supposed to be a routine late-night interview but quickly spiraled into the most explosive confrontation in talk show history. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds. Last night's episode of The Late Show started like any other, with Stephen Colbert delivering his monologue to the usual mix of cheers and laughter from the studio audience. But what transpired during the interview segment would leave viewers stunned, social media in an uproar, and raise serious questions about Colbert's professionalism as a host. This wasn't just a disagreement between two comedians. This was a full-scale meltdown that exposed the dark side of late-night television. The trouble began almost immediately after Bill Maher walked onto the set, his trademark swagger intact as he settled into the guest chair. The audience welcomed him with enthusiastic applause, completely unaware that they were about to witness television history in the making. Colbert, wearing his signature suit and tie, seemed unusually tense from the moment the cameras started rolling, his usually warm demeanor replaced by something colder, more calculating. "Bill, great to have you back on the show," Colbert began, but there was an edge to his voice that regular viewers would have immediately noticed. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and his hands were clasped tightly together on his desk. Enough way. Classic signs of barely contained hostility. Maher, veteran of countless talk show appearances, picked up on the tension immediately. "Always a pleasure, Stephen. Though I have to say, the energy feels a bit different tonight. Everything okay?" The question hung in the air for a moment too long. Colbert's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly before he launched into what seemed like a prepared attack. "Well, Bill, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. Your recent comments about progressive politics have been, shall we say, problematic for a lot of people who used to consider you an ally." The studio audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the light-hearted banter they'd come to expect from late-night television. Maher's eyebrows raised slightly, a sign that he was both surprised and intrigued by Colbert's aggressive opening gambit. "Problematic?" Maher repeated, his voice taking on that familiar tone of intellectual superiority that had made him both famous and infamous. "Stephen, I've been saying the same things for decades. The only thing that's changed is that some people have become so ideologically rigid that they can't handle anyone questioning their sacred cows." Colbert leaned forward, his mock-serious persona completely abandoned. "Sacred cows? Is that what you call basic human decency? Because when you mock transgender rights, when you dismiss concerns about systemic racism, when you platform conspiracy theorists, that's not brave truth-telling, Bill. That's just lazy contrarianism dressed up as intellectual courage." The accusation hit its mark. Maher's casual demeanor evaporated, replaced by the sharp-edged debater who had spent decades dismantling opponents on his own show. "Hold on there, Stephen. First of all, I don't mock anyone's rights. I question the methods, the rhetoric, the sometimes counterproductive strategies that activists use. There's a difference between supporting a cause and supporting every single tactic used to advance that cause." "Is there?" Colbert shot back, his voice rising slightly. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you've made a career out of punching down at marginalized communities while hiding behind the shield of just asking questions. When did you become the guy who spends more time criticizing the people fighting for justice than the people perpetuating injustice?" The studio audience was dead silent now, sensing that this had moved far beyond normal television discourse. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether they should keep rolling or cut to commercial. Maher's face flushed red, and he uncrossed his legs, leaning forward in his chair, a clear sign that his famous temper was about to make an appearance. "You know what, Stephen? I think you've been living in your liberal bubble so long that you've forgotten what actual independent thinking looks like. You've become exactly what you used to make fun of. A sanctimonious preacher delivering sermons to your choir, instead of challenging them to think critically about anything. Colbert's mask slipped completely. Gone was any pretense of the jovial late-night host. In his place sat a man clearly struggling to maintain his composure, his hands now visibly shaking with barely contained rage. Independent thinking? You call it independent thinking? When you spend half your show agreeing with right-wing talking points? When you give platforms to people who spread dangerous misinformation? When I what? Maher interrupted, his voice cutting through Colbert's accusation like a blade. When I refuse to toe the party line? When I actually examine ideas, instead of just accepting them because they come from the right side? Stephen, you used to understand that comedy was about challenging power, not protecting it. The tension in the studio was now palpable. Audience members were looking at each other with confused expressions, clearly uncomfortable with the hostile atmosphere that had completely overtaken what should have been an entertaining interview. Behind the cameras, production assistants were frantically whispering to each other, unsure how to handle a situation that was spiraling completely out of control. Colbert stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. Protecting power? I'm protecting people, Bill. Real people who are hurt by the kind of rhetoric you've been spreading. But I guess that doesn't matter when you're more concerned with being seen as the brave truth-teller than actually telling the truth. What happened next would change everything, setting the stage for a confrontation that would expose the ugly reality beneath the polished veneer of late-night television. Maher slowly rose from his chair, matching Colbert's aggressive posture. The two men now stood facing each other across the small desk that suddenly seemed like a battlefield between opposing armies. The studio lights cast harsh shadows across both their faces, transforming familiar television personalities into something far more menacing. You want to talk about truth, Stephen? Maher's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more weight than any shout. Let's talk about truth. The truth is that you've become a corporate shill masquerading as a comedian. When's the last time you said anything that actually challenged your network's interests? When's the last time you took a real risk instead of playing it safe with your audience? The audience gasped audibly. This wasn't just personal anymore. Maher had struck at the heart of Colbert's professional integrity, questioning everything he'd built his career on. Several people in the front row were visibly uncomfortable, some looking toward the exits as if sensing that they were witnessing something they shouldn't be seeing. Colbert's face went white, then flushed crimson. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. How dare you? How dare you come onto my show and question my integrity? You don't know what you're talking about, Bill. You haven't known what you're talking about for years. Haven't I? Maher stepped closer to the desk, his voice gaining strength and venom. I know that you've turned into exactly what we used to mock together back when we actually had spines. Remember when comedy was dangerous? Remember when we weren't afraid to offend people if it meant getting to something true? Now you're just another bought and paid for mouthpiece too scared to say anything that might hurt your precious ratings. The production crew was in full panic mode now. Camera operators were getting conflicting signals from the control room, some gesturing to keep rolling, others frantically drawing fingers across their throats to indicate they should cut. The floor manager stood frozen, clearly out of his depth, dealing with a situation that had devolved far beyond anything in their crisis management playbook. Colbert moved around the desk, eliminating the last barrier between him and his guest. The two men now stood face to face, close enough that their heated breathing was audible through the studio microphones. You want to know what's dangerous, Bill? What's dangerous is giving platforms to hate. What's dangerous is normalizing extremism. What's dangerous is hiding behind comedy when you're too cowardly to own your actual political positions. My political positions? Maher laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitter contempt. At least I have positions beyond whatever focus group tells you will get the most applause. You know what your problem is, Stephen? You've forgotten how to think for yourself. Every opinion you express has been pre-approved by your writers, your producers, your network executives. You're not a comedian anymore. You're a puppet with better suits. The insult landed like a physical blow. Colbert's entire body tensed, and for a moment it looked like he might actually take a swing at his guest. Instead, he pointed an accusatory finger directly at Maher's chest. You want to talk about puppets? Let's talk about how you've become a useful idiot for the very people you used to criticize. How many far-right talking points have you repeated verbatim? How many times have you done their work for them by attacking the left while giving the right a free pass? I give everyone a free pass when they deserve it, and criticism when they deserve it, Maher shot back, his own finger now jabbing toward Colbert. That's called intellectual honesty. Something you might remember if you weren't so busy performing for your trained seals in the audience. The audience erupted in confused murmurs and uncomfortable laughter. Some people were clearly enjoying the spectacle, while others looked genuinely distressed by the hostile atmosphere. A few audience members had actually gotten up and were quietly making their way toward the exits, apparently deciding they'd seen enough. Colbert's voice reached a fever pitch. Intellectual honesty. You call it intellectual honesty when you spend more time attacking transgender kids than you do attacking fascists? When you mock Black Lives Matter protesters but coddle insurrectionists? When I what? Maher exploded, his carefully maintained composure finally shattering completely. When I refuse to pretend that every progressive cause is beyond criticism? When I point out that maybe, just maybe, some of the tactics being used are counterproductive? God forbid someone suggests that the left might occasionally be wrong about something. The studio had become a pressure cooker ready to explode. Colbert stepped even closer, invading Maher's personal space in a clear act of intimidation. You know what, Bill? I think we're done here. I think this interview is over. But Maher wasn't backing down. If anything, Colbert's attempt to end the confrontation only inflamed him further. Oh, we're done. You're going to kick me off your show because I won't kiss your ass and tell you how brave and righteous you are? How very open-minded of you, Stephen. How very tolerant. The sarcasm dripped from every word, and the effect on Colbert was immediate and devastating. His face contorted with rage, and he took another step forward, now standing close enough to Maher that their chests were almost touching. The tension between them was so thick it seemed to crackle with electricity. "Get out," Colbert said, his voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my studio right now." Maher smiled, but it was the cold, predatory smile of someone who knew they'd just won a decisive victory. There it is. There's the real Stephen Colbert. Not the fake nice guy who pretends to care about free speech and open dialogue. Just another authoritarian who can't handle being challenged. What happened next would push both men past the point of no return, transforming a heated argument into something far more destructive. Colbert's composure finally snapped completely. His voice rose to a shout that echoed through the stunned studio. "Authoritarian? You're calling me authoritarian? This is my show, Bill, my show, and I don't have to sit here and listen to you spew your pseudo-intellectual garbage to my audience." The mask had fallen away entirely now. Gone was any trace of the thoughtful comedian who had built his reputation on clever satire and measured commentary. In his place stood a man consumed by rage, his face twisted with an ugly fury that shocked even the most seasoned television professionals watching from the wings. Maher's response was ice-cold and calculated, delivered with the precision of a surgeon making a fatal cut. "Your show? Your audience? Listen to yourself, Stephen. You sound like a dictator talking about his subjects. Is that really what you think this is? Your little kingdom where everyone has to agree with you or get thrown out?" The audience was in complete chaos now. Some people were frantically trying to record the confrontation on their phones, while others were covering their faces in embarrassment. Several audience members were openly arguing among themselves, the toxic atmosphere spreading like a contagion throughout the studio. The carefully controlled environment of late-night television had devolved into something resembling a Jerry Springer episode. Colbert jabbed his finger directly into Maher's chest, crossing a line that no professional broadcaster should ever cross. You know what? You're right. This is my kingdom. And in my kingdom, we don't give platforms to people who punch down at vulnerable communities. We don't normalize hate speech. We don't touch me, Maher snarled, grabbing Colbert's wrist and pushing his hand away with shocking force. Don't you dare put your hands on me. You want to talk about crossing lines? You just crossed the biggest one of all. The physical contact sent shockwaves through the studio. Several audience members screamed, and the production crew finally sprang into action, with multiple people rushing toward the interview area. But both men were too far gone to be easily stopped, their mutual hatred having reached a boiling point that threatened to explode into actual violence. Colbert pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned, but his rage only intensified. You think you can come on to my show and insult me? Insult my audience? Insult everything I stand for? And then act like the victim when I call you out on it? You're pathetic, Bill. You're a washed-up has-been who's desperately trying to stay relevant by saying increasingly outrageous things. The personal attack hit Maher like a physical blow. His face went pale, then flushed with an anger so intense it seemed to vibrate through his entire body. Washed up? Has been? At least I still have something to say beyond whatever corporate-approved talking points your handlers feed you. At least I'm not a complete sellout who's forgotten what comedy is supposed to be about. What comedy is supposed to be about? Colbert screamed, his voice cracking with fury. You think comedy is about attacking people who can't fight back? You think comedy is about giving aid and comfort to fascists? You think comedy is about betraying every principle you used to claim you believed in? Maher stepped back, his expression shifting from anger to something approaching disgust. You know what, Stephen? You're right about one thing. This interview is over. But not because you're kicking me out. Because I can't stand to be in the same room as you for one more second. The declaration hit the studio like a thunderbolt. This wasn't just a heated argument anymore. This was a complete breakdown of professional decorum, a public destruction of whatever relationship these two men had once shared. The audience fell silent, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented in television history. Colbert's voice dropped to a venomous whisper. Good. Get out and don't ever come back, and take your toxic, divisive rhetoric with you. Maher began walking toward the edge of the set, but he wasn't finished yet. He turned back to face both Colbert and the cameras, his voice carrying clearly throughout the silent studio. You want to know what's really toxic and divisive, Stephen? It's hosts who pretend to care about dialogue and free speech but then silence anyone who disagrees with them. It's comedians who've become so sanctimonious that they've forgotten how to laugh at themselves. It's people like you who've turned entertainment into propaganda. The final accusation hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Colbert took several steps toward Maher, his fists clenched at his sides. How dare you? How dare you come into my house and— Your house? Maher interrupted, his voice filled with contempt. This isn't your house, Stephen. This is supposed to be a place where ideas get discussed, where people can disagree without being demonized. But you've turned it into an echo chamber for your own ego. Security personnel were now moving toward the set, but Maher waved them off with a dismissive gesture. He straightened his jacket, regaining some of his composure as he prepared to make his exit. I don't need to be escorted out. I can find my own way. But as he reached the edge of the set, he turned back one final time, delivering a parting shot that would be replayed millions of times across social media. You know what the real tragedy is here, Stephen? You used to be funny. You used to be brave. You used to understand that comedy was about challenging orthodoxy, not enforcing it. Now you're just another corporate mouthpiece too scared to risk offending anyone in your target demographic. Colbert's response was barely coherent, a mixture of rage and humiliation that came out as a strangled shout. "Get out! Get out! Get out!" Maher smiled one last cold smile and walked off the set, leaving behind a studio in complete chaos. Audience members were still arguing among themselves, some cheering Maher's departure, while others seemed stunned by Colbert's behavior. The production crew was scrambling to figure out how to salvage what was left of the show, while Colbert himself stood alone in the interview area, his chest heaving with exhaustion and fury. The cameras kept rolling for several more seconds, capturing Colbert's disheveled appearance and the obvious distress of everyone around him. When they finally cut to commercial, the damage was already done. The confrontation had been broadcast live to millions of viewers, and within minutes, clips of the argument were spreading across every social media platform. What had started as a routine late-night interview had become a television disaster that would be remembered for years to come. The facade of civility that typically governs such encounters had been completely shattered, revealing the ugly personal animosities that often lurk beneath the surface of public discourse. Both men had exposed themselves in ways that would have lasting consequences for their careers and reputations. As the studio lights dimmed and the audience was finally dismissed, one thing was absolutely clear. This was a confrontation that would define both men's legacies, a moment when the pretense of professional courtesy gave way to raw, unfiltered hostility that shocked everyone who witnessed it.